ChatGPT said. Amara had always been a quiet child, one of those girls who spoke more with her eyes than her mouth, who listened more than she talked. From the moment she was born, her gaze carried a kind of depth that unsettled even grown men. The elders used to say she was born watching, a child whose eyes had seen too much in a world that rarely gave children the chance. Her mother, Nina, had understood her silence, had woven her hair gently every evening, and told her stories that danced on the edge of folklore and truth. But Nina had died suddenly, too suddenly, and her death left a void in the house that the wind itself seemed afraid to cross. Her father, Ghanian, was a good man, but like many good men, he was helpless when it came to the shadows that grew inside a grieving home. Within a year he remarried. Her name was Mama Idina, a widow from a neighboring village known more for her sharp tongue than her warm embrace. At first, Mama Idina tried to play the role of the dutiful wife and stepmother, offering Amara meals with a cold smile and words laced with brittle sweetness. But it didn't take long before her patience wore thin and the mask slipped. Mama Idina couldn't stand the sight of Amara. It wasn't just that Amara was quiet or strange or stubborn, it was her face. The girl was the very image of Nina, the same high cheekbones, the same moondark eyes, the same tilt of the head when lost in thought. It was like living with a ghost. And Mama Idina did not like ghosts. She began small. Whispered things to Ghanian when she thought Amara couldn't hear. She doesn't sleep at night, did you know that? She talks to things that aren't there. I caught her staring into the fire, not blinking. Ghanian, tired and unsure, brushed off the comments. But the seed had been planted. The villagers, always eager for the smallest breeze of scandal, picked up the rumors like fallen leaves and added their own. That Nina had died under mysterious circumstances because of her daughter's curse, that Amara was born with one foot in the spirit world, that she was a bringer of misfortune. Amara heard it all. She didn't cry, didn't fight. She listened. And she watched. Mama Idina, encouraged by the growing fear in the village and emboldened by Ghanian's growing distance, let the mask fall completely. She began giving Amara the hardest chores, sweeping out the goat shed, fetching water from the farthest well, scrubbing cooking pots until her knuckles bled. When Amara made no protest, Mama Idina grew more spiteful. She thinks she's better than me, she hissed one day to the neighbor woman. With that silence, that ghost face. But I'll break her. I swear it. And then came the whispers, louder now, deliberate and sharpened like knives. Her mother practiced dark things, she was never right in the head. They say Amara talks to the dead. The village, small and superstitious, clutched these rumors tightly. Children began to avoid her. Women crossed the road when she walked by. Even Ghanian, worn thin and guilt-ridden, began to avert his eyes when she entered a room. Amara remained silent. But her silence wasn't weakness, it was something else. Something gathering. Mama Idina's resentment festered until it curdled into something more dangerous. One evening, as the red sun dipped behind the hills, she stood over Amara as the girl prepared supper and said quietly, "I had a dream about your mother last night." She was cold. Her mouth was full of earth. Amara didn't respond. Her hands kept peeling the yam. "I think she wants company," Mama Idina added, voice like ice on skin. That night the air felt thick with warning. The wind did not blow. The goats bleated without reason. Somewhere far off, an owl called once and then fell silent. In the stillness of their hut, Mama Idina stared at Amara as the girl slept, and her lips moved with silent words no child should ever have to hear. By morning something had shifted. The trees outside leaned as if listening. The earth, cracked and dry, seemed to hum beneath their feet. And Amara woke up knowing the world had tilted, even if no one else could see it. But Mama Idina saw it, and it terrified her. She began to insist that Amara was cursed, pointing to the withering leaves, the cracked cooking pots, the dreams that gnawed at her sleep like rats. She began locking Amara inside during the day, claiming it was for her safety. But the truth was she feared what the girl might do, or what others might come to believe. Amara bore it all in silence, still watching, still listening. Then came the rainless weeks. Crops failed. Children fell ill. Goats birthed stillborns. The village turned inward looking for blame. And Mama Idina was only too eager to offer it. "It's her," she said, eyes wide, pointing a trembling finger at the girl she feared. "It's always been her." In the end, fear does not need evidence, it needs a story. And Amara's story had already been written for her. She was the cursed child. The spirit touched. The quiet girl who looked like a ghost and carried too many secrets in her stare. And Mama Idina, bitter and cruel, was about to decide how that story would end. It was during one of her long walks, away from the eyes that judged her and the stepmother who loathed her, that Amara first met the gravekeeper. The graveyard lay on the far edge of the village, past the crooked baobab tree and beyond the cracked shrine stone where the elders used to make offerings. It was a place children were warned to avoid not just because of the dead, but because of what lay with the dead, secrets, curses and things too old to name. The gravekeeper, a man named Papa Nduka, was as ancient as the tombstones he tended. His back was hunched like the hills, and his skin looked like the cracked bark of an old irako tree. Most villagers said he had lived too long, that he had seen too much. But they left him alone, for he had taken the work no one else dared, keeping watch over the resting place of generations. Amara had wandered there not by mistake but by pull. Something in the wind, in the bones of her own feet, had urged her. She felt strangely at peace among the weathered graves, some sunken, some marked with simple stones, others sealed in carved tombs older than memory. She often sat in silence there, the kind of silence that felt full rather than empty. Papa Nduka noticed her before she noticed him. One afternoon, as she knelt beside a grave overrun with weeds, he spoke behind her. "You walk among bones like you were born to," he said, voice brittle and low like dry leaves. Amara turned slowly, unafraid. "They don't whisper when I'm here," she said, meeting his eyes. He squinted at her, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he sighed, setting down his rusted shovel. "Come sit, girl. If the dead don't mind you, maybe I won't either." From that day on, Amara began visiting Papa Nduka often. He was gruff and blunt, but never cruel. He taught her the names on the oldest stones, told her who had died of fever, who of heartbreak, and who had simply vanished. He spoke of traditions long faded, rituals of passing, burial songs, and why some tombs were sealed with ash and salt. Amara listened to it all with the same quiet attentiveness she gave the wind. But one day, as the sky bled orange and the shadows lengthened, Papa Nduka pulled her aside with a seriousness he had never shown before. "You mustn't be here after sunset," he said, eyes sharp. "Not near the tombs. Not near the old ones." Amara tilted her head. "Why?" He hesitated, then glanced over his shoulder as if the graves themselves might hear. "Because not all who lie here sleep. Some were buried, unfinished. Some were locked in not to rest but to be kept in." Amara frowned. "The dead can't leave the earth." Papa Nduka gave a short, humorless laugh. "That's what they say. That's what they want to believe. But this land, child, it remembers. Sometimes it remembers too well. The blood spilled. The secret swallowed. The lies buried with a song. This graveyard is not just bones, it's a ledger. A record of every sin this village tried to forget." He grew quiet for a moment, then added, "There are chambers here, sealed ones. Older than the village. Built before the current chief's great-great-grandfather was born. Doors of stone, bound by rituals long forgotten. Never go near them. Not even in daylight." Amara listened, her expression unreadable. "But what if something inside calls to me?" Papa Nduka turned sharply. "Then you run." She said nothing more that day, but the conversation rooted itself inside her like a seed. She began noticing more, how the trees near certain tombs never grew leaves, how birds avoided the burial grounds altogether. Once she saw a trail of ants circling one particular stone door, never daring to cross the threshold. Even the wind, which once felt like a companion, moved differently near the sealed chambers, as if it feared being trapped inside. One evening, Papa Nduka showed her an old brass talisman shaped like a closed eye. "This," he said, "was once worn by gravekeepers when tending the deeper parts. It wards off the ones that never stopped watching. I only have one left. If you ever feel cold wind with no storm, wear this." Amara took it, gently, and wore it on a thin string around her neck from that day forward. The villagers didn't know of her visits to the gravekeeper. If they had, they might have called her even more cursed. But the graveyard became her sanctuary, a place of truths buried and unspoken pain, which felt familiar. She grew to understand the silence of the dead more than the noise of the living. And in Papa Nduka she found something close to a kindred spirit, a man who also bore the weight of secrets too heavy for others to carry. Still the warnings haunted her. Especially the one about the locked chambers. One dusk, long after Papa Nduka had retired to his hut, Amara stood alone near the oldest tomb. Her skin prickled, though the air was warm. The silence pressed in, thick as cloth. And from behind the carved stone door she thought, just for a moment, she heard breathing. Not wind. Not the rustle of leaves. Breathing. Slow. Measured. Ancient. She didn't open the door. But she didn't run either. Instead, she whispered softly into the quiet, a word her mother had once taught her. A name, perhaps. Or a memory. The breathing stopped. And far above, the sky held its breath. The wind howled that night, stirring the thatched roofs and whispering through the crooked branches like voices too tired to scream. The village had gone quiet early. Doors latched. Lamps snuffed. Even the crickets seemed to retreat beneath the soil, knowing something unnatural was stirring in the air. Only one house still burned its hearth fire long past nightfall, Amara's. Inside, tension gripped the walls like a shroud. Mama Idina stood by the door, her face cast in shadow, her eyes glowing with the kind of madness that only bitterness can birth. Amara sat in the far corner, clutching her lantern, its small flame trembling in its glass prison like a frightened heart. "You've bewitched this house," Mama Idina spat. "With your whispers, your silences, your wandering eyes. You sleep near graves and come back smelling of ash. The villagers see it too, they just don't speak." Amara said nothing. She had learned that words were useless with her stepmother. That nothing she said would undo the hatred Mama Idina held in her eyes every time she looked at her late husband's daughter. "Your mother brought ruin," Mama Idina hissed, her voice lower now, trembling with old fury. "And now you, her shadow, bring it again. But not in my house. Not while I still breathe." Before Amara could move, Mama Idina grabbed her by the wrist and dragged her out into the cold. The sky was moonless, and the night wrapped around them like mourning cloth. Amara didn't cry. She didn't scream. Her feet scraped over gravel and roots, her thin nightdress flapping in the wind like a flag of surrender. The villagers heard. Of course they did. Doors creaked open. Faces peeked through curtains. But none stepped out. Mama Idina was a figure not easily crossed. She had power not just from her husband's name, but from the quiet fear she sowed through charm and venom alike. People had seen what happened to those who challenged her, and no one was willing to become the next example. Only one voice rose from the shadows. "You leave her be," came the frail cry of Papa Nduka, standing crooked at the edge of the road, leaning on his cane. "That child has done nothing." Mama Idina turned, eyes blazing. "Stay in your tombs, old man. You've lived too long among corpses to know the living anymore." Papa Nduka opened his mouth again, but Amara shook her head slightly, the flicker of a warning in her gaze. He closed his lips and stepped back into the dark. The crypt stood beyond the graves, its door carved with worn glyphs that no one remembered how to read. It had belonged to Amara's family for generations, before her mother, before her grandfather. It was more a monument than a tomb, stone thick and sealed by iron and time. Amara had only seen it from afar, never dared near its threshold. Tonight she would enter it. Mama Idina pushed open the old gate, the rust screaming like something alive. She dragged Amara to the entrance and pulled from her cloak a heavy iron key. Where she had gotten it, Amara did not know. But she had it, and the door obeyed her. Inside, the air was thick with dust and cold like river stones. The smell of old incense clung to the air, something once sacred, now long forgotten. The tomb held only shadows, stone shelves carved into the walls, and skeletal remains wrapped in ceremonial cloth. A few jars lined the walls, offerings perhaps. Or warnings. Mama Idina shoved Amara inside and dropped the lantern on the floor, its flame sputtering. "You want to live among the dead?" she said. "Then let them be your bedmates." She pulled the iron door shut. The key turned with a final, echoing click. And Amara was alone. At first, the silence was complete. Heavy. Crushing. Amara stood motionless, letting her eyes adjust to the dim flicker of the lantern. Shadows danced along the walls, tracing the sockets of skulls and the crumbling edges of old cloth. She moved slowly, letting her breathing calm. Fear threatened to rise, but she clutched the brass talisman beneath her dress, the one Papa Nduka had given her, and forced it down. She did not cry. She did not panic. Instead, she sat in the center of the tomb and whispered the names she remembered. Her mother's name, her grandmother's, the names Papa Nduka had told her of the buried. Each word steadied her. And then, the whispers came. They weren't loud. Not at first. Just a hush, like breath sliding along stone. But they grew. Louder. Closer. Surrounding her. But they were not angry. They were curious. Some part of her knew this. Felt it. Amara lifted the lantern and looked around slowly. Her gaze landed on a carving near the back wall, one of the symbols she had seen in the graveyard. The lantern flickered, then flared. She walked toward it, fingers brushing along the ancient design. Something pulsed behind it, faintly warm. And then she heard a voice, clear, feminine, sorrowful. "You carry her pain." Amara didn't know whose voice it was, but it was inside her, like it rose from the marrow of her bones. You are her echo, it said, but not her end. She looked around and saw movement, not of flesh but memory. Ghostlight flickering over the bones. Shapes taking form. A woman standing over a cradle. A child being taken. A betrayal hidden behind a smile. These weren't just spirits. They were secrets. The tomb wasn't just a burial place, it was a vault. A prison for truths that the living had sealed away. And now Amara was part of it. Hours passed. Or maybe days. Time bent in that place. But as dawn approached, something shifted. The silence broke like glass and a hum began to rise from the walls. The carvings glowed faintly as if touched by flame. The lantern burned higher, not lower. And the voice returned. They left us with rot. You came with breath. Amara stepped toward the center of the tomb and raised the lantern. The floor beneath her glowed in a perfect circle. She remembered the old stories Papa and Duca told, the ones about binding and unbinding. She knelt and traced the circle with her finger. Then softly she spoke, I see you. The air stilled. I hear you. The shadows bowed. I will carry your truth. And with that the tomb opened. The door, long locked with rust and curse, creaked open of its own will. Morning light spilled in, cutting across the darkness like a blade. Amara stepped out slowly. The village was gathered already, drawn by the screams Mama Idina had made when the door had begun to shake in the night. They gasped when they saw Amara, whole and calm, walking out of the crypt barefoot, her lantern still burning. But what made them fall to their knees was not her. It was what followed. Whispers on the wind. Cold that bit at their bones even under the rising sun. And the sense, deep, soul-shaking, that the dead had spoken. And chosen. You said. Darkness in the crypt was no longer just the absence of light. It was alive. It pulsed gently like breath, like a heartbeat that hummed from stone and silence. Amara sat in the center of it, the lantern burning low beside her, its wick curled and weak. The flame cast long shadows across the walls, and in those shadows she began to see faces. At first she believed they were tricks of her mind, flickers caused by fatigue, imagination stretched too thin by fear and solitude. But as the night deepened, the silence began to stretch and warp. And then came the murmurs. They did not crash into her like sudden thunder. They arrived slowly, like mist creeping through morning grass. Soft and fragmented. Hushed syllables. Unfinished names. But they weren't frightening. They were familiar. Amara turned her head slightly, listening harder. Her ears picked out patterns like someone singing a lullaby with no melody. She sat up, wrapping her arms around her knees, heart steady despite the unnaturalness of it all. The first voice was of a woman, gentle, broken with sorrow. He left me here, swore he'd come back. The red beads, he never came. The second was a child, soft, wondering. Is it still raining? I like the rain. I like the way it smelled on the mango tree. Then a deeper one, a man, maybe a soldier, voice gravelly with death. We died for nothing. They covered our names with lies. No one even sings for us now. Amara blinked, eyes moist. Her throat tightened, not with fear but with recognition. These weren't monsters. They were people, stories, silenced ones. She whispered softly, Why are you speaking to me? The air around her stirred. The shadows swirled gently. Because you stayed, the woman said. Because you listened, the child echoed. Because you carry truth, the soldier added. Amara looked at the glyphs on the walls, her fingers tracing their edges. Her ancestors had built this tomb not to bury the dead, but to contain what they knew. Secrets too heavy for the living. Stories never allowed to breathe. That night, one by one, they came to her. There was Nuru, the midwife, cast out when the chief's son died in her arms. They had said it was her curse, but Nuru told Amara the truth, that the boy had been poisoned by his own kin to seize inheritance early. There was Ease, the warrior who had marched into a battle he knew was lost, ordered by a jealous brother to die and leave no rival behind. And there was Awil, a child no older than 6, who had fallen into a well, but the whispers said it wasn't an accident. The stepmother had blamed the wind, but the child's ghost remembered hands on her back. Each voice brought a chill, but also warmth. Amara was no longer alone. They circled her like an unseen family, telling her the truths they had taken to the grave. I will remember, Amara whispered to them, even if no one else will. The murmurs paused, then grew louder, not in menace but in urgency. Then you must carry us, they said together. A gust of cold swept through the tomb and the lantern went out. Amara sat in complete blackness now, but she was not afraid. The darkness had become a cocoon, and the spirits within it had grown bolder. They no longer whispered at the edge of her hearing. They spoke clearly now, conversations rising and falling like a sea of memory. She saw them now not in flesh but in essence. Flickers of light formed human shapes, glowing threads of who they once were. A mother brushing her daughter's hair. A man standing before a village tribunal, accused unjustly. A boy hiding beneath a tree, clutching a carved wooden lion. Amara moved from spirit to spirit, listening. Some told her things she could barely understand. Symbols, visions, names she had never heard. Others spoke of events she recognized but now saw in a different light. The strange illness that had swept through the village when she was 5, the fire that destroyed the shrine, the death of her mother. Her breath caught. "My mother?" she whispered into the dark. No one answered. She asked again, louder this time. "Where is my mother?" The murmurs faltered. Then a shape stepped forward, small, bent, radiating sadness. It was Obioma, her grandmother's sister, long dead. She did not speak. Instead, she held out a hand made of smoke and memory. In her palm rested a necklace Amara recognized, her mother's pendant, a tiny wooden carving of a bird, its wing broken. The image burned into Amara's mind. She knew too much, Obioma finally said, voice a rustle of leaves. And she refused to stay silent. Amara's body chilled and her jaw clenched. The whispers around her grew softer, like 1,000 voices mourning in unison. Did she die naturally? Amara asked. The silence that followed was answer enough. She gripped the pendant in the vision with shaking hands, even though it wasn't real. Even though it was just memory. They killed her, Amara said. And the crypt trembled. Sometime later, Amara did not know how long, a new voice entered the circle. Faint at first. Uncertain. Sister. Amara turned, heart thudding. Queasy. Her younger cousin who had vanished 2 years ago. They said he had drowned in the river, but no body had ever been found. Now he stood before her, a spirit, fragile and pale. You remember me? He said, smiling faintly. I never stopped, she said. He nodded slowly. I wanted to tell them. I tried. But the river took me first. Tell me now, Amara urged. And he did. A gathering in the forest. A secret meeting. Voices in the dark. An argument over land, over old borders and broken promises. Queasy had seen too much. And someone had made sure he disappeared. When his tale ended, Amara had tears in her eyes, but her jaw was set. These stories weren't just for grief. They were weapons. She looked around at the swirling spirits. If I leave this place, will you come with me? We already are, they whispered. She rose. The spirits did not fade, but they stepped back, watching. Amara walked to the iron door once more. She pressed her hand to it, not expecting it to open. But it wasn't locked anymore. The crypt was never meant to keep her in. It had only been waiting. Waiting for someone who would listen. Outside, dawn painted the village in pale gold. A cold wind stirred, carrying with it something heavier than morning dew, truth. Amara stepped onto the path, her dress streaked with dust, her face calm. The villagers, gathering again in uneasy circles, fell silent. Mama Idina stood at the edge of the gathering, her face tight with disbelief. You should be dead, she hissed. Amara met her eyes and said, You should be afraid. Then she walked past her, leaving the woman trembling. The murmurs followed Amara, not whispers of spirits anymore but of people. She lived. She walked out. She knows. They didn't understand it yet, but they felt it. Something had changed. Something had awakened. And Amara would not be silent again. The whispers had quieted, but they hadn't left. They stayed close like unseen guides in the dark, urging Amara toward something unfinished. As she moved deeper into the crypt, her lantern, relit with a trembling flame, cast flickering gold on the stone around her. She passed rows of coffins, some rotted with time, others sealed with symbols she couldn't read. And yet her steps didn't falter. She followed a sensation more than a sound, a tug in her chest as though something was calling her, not with words but with longing. At the far end of the chamber, where the wall curved in shadow, one coffin stood out. It was older than the others, its wood swollen and warped, the carvings barely visible through dust and time. But beside it, partially hidden, was something odd. A slab of stone too smooth, too pale, almost as if it had been placed to cover something else. Amara stepped closer. She ran her hand over it. Unlike the rest of the wall, this section felt warm to the touch, as though it remembered life. Her fingers found a faint seam along the edge, like a boundary between truths. The air thickened, heavy with the presence of the spirits watching silently behind her. And then she pressed. A crack split through the wall. Dust poured out, and the slab crumbled like old bread, revealing a narrow passage beyond, a chamber that hadn't seen light in generations. Amara stepped through. What lay beyond took her breath. The chamber was small, round, and filled with the remnants of 100 stolen stories. Shelves lined the walls, heaped with items. Rusted trinkets, faded letters sealed in wax, crumbling scrolls, broken beads, and golden rings dulled by time. The smell was ancient, earth, decay, and something sacred. Amara turned slowly, taking it all in. These were not offerings. They were thefts. Things taken from the dead, things meant to rest with them. Trinkets that held meaning, power, love. Hoarded and hidden away. And in the center of it all, beneath a cloth now brittle with age, sat a wooden box. She knelt and pulled the cloth back. Inside lay a single object. A locket. Her heart clenched. She reached for it with trembling fingers, brushing away the fine layer of dust. The locket was gold, with a carved bird on its cover, its wings outstretched, almost in flight. She knew this locket. She had seen it in dreams. Around her mother's neck in fading memories. It had once held a tiny drawing of Amara as a baby, and a lock of her infant hair. Her hand closed around it. The moment she touched it, the room shifted. Not in motion but in energy. The air grew heavy, dense with memory. The walls around her hummed softly, and the spirits stirred again. And then she heard her. Amara? The voice was unmistakable. Soft, warm, familiar like home. Amara gasped. Mama? You found it? Tears sprang to her eyes as she clutched the locket to her chest. Her mother's voice was clearer now, threading through the crypt like sunlight through fog. They took it from me before they took my breath. I tried to protect you. I tried. Mama, I never stopped wondering. I never believed the lies. I know, my child. That's why the spirits speak to you. That's why you see what others refuse to. Amara sobbed, not out of fear or sorrow, but relief. Her mother's love had not vanished. It had been buried like everything else. The spirits around her whispered in unison. This was the heart of the silence. Now it is broken. And with that, the room seemed to breathe. The chamber, once cold and forgotten, felt alive. Light, faint and golden, began to emanate from the relics, as though gratitude rippled through the items finally being remembered. A low, resonant hum filled the air. Amara stood. She had uncovered not just a hidden room, but a vault of truths buried by greed and shame. The dead had been robbed not just of their possessions but their peace. She would return these stories to the world. She would carry them. Holding the locket close, she stepped back into the crypt's main hall. The hidden chamber closed behind her with a gentle sigh of dust and wind. But the locket pulsed faintly in her hand. Her mother's memory had awakened something. And Amara was no longer just a girl cast into the dark. She was the keeper of the dead, the bearer of their secrets. And the truth was no longer buried. Amara sat in the cold silence of the crypt, the locket pressed against her chest like a heartbeat she had forgotten. It was as if her mother's warmth lingered in the gold, a breath trapped inside the metal, whispering that she had never truly left. But something else stirred now, deeper and older than memory. The spirits had grown restless. The murmurs that once drifted like mist now circled her in full voices. Their tones were not mournful but urgent. A gathering storm of truth pressing against the walls. She stood, her lantern raised high, the locket in her palm. You wanted me to find this. But why? What do I need to know? The answer came not in words but in vision. The lantern's flame flared suddenly, white, blue, then violet, throwing long shadows across the stone. Then everything around her fell away, like dust scattered in wind. Amara found herself standing in a place between worlds, not quite living, not fully dead. The crypt was gone. The air was still. A twilight place. An ancestral veil. Before her stood a group of figures, translucent, ancient, powerful. They were the spirits who had whispered to her. Now they stood tall and clear. Warriors, midwives, children, elders. All of them once silenced, buried with secrets too heavy for their graves. And among them, her mother. Beautiful, proud, strong. Just as Amara remembered. But her face bore sorrow deeper than time. My daughter, she said, stepping forward, her voice like the hush of wind through baobab trees. The time has come for you to know the truth. The truth they buried with me. Amara's chest tightened. I always felt there was something wrong. That the way you died was not fate, her mother said softly. No. It was envy. It was poison poured into a cup meant for kindness. It was Mama Idina. The name hit the air like a stone. The spirits behind her mother bowed their heads in grief. She envied what we had, your father's love, my place in the village, the strength in your eyes. She could not bear to live in my shadow, so she took my life to wear my place. But no matter what she did, she could never silence the truth. That's why she feared you. That's why she locked you with us. Amara's hands trembled. Poison. A mother taken. A girl locked away not out of madness, but because her presence threatened a lie. I always wondered, Amara whispered, why my father's eyes turned distant after you passed. Why the elders spoke in half-truths. Why Mama Idina always looked at me like I was a crack in the wall she couldn't patch. Her mother's spirit nodded. Because you are. You are the fracture through which truth escapes. Another spirit stepped forward now, an old woman with riverstone beads around her neck. I was the midwife who helped deliver you, child, she said. I held your mother's hand as she labored through the night. I watched Mama Idina slip into her room, claiming she'd brought soup. Hours later, your mother was gone. Another spirit spoke. I was a village herbalist. I saw the herbs she used. Belladonna and fever root, too much. Enough to make the heart fail. The voices rose one by one, each spirit offering a shard of the story. The gravekeeper. I saw her sneak into the burial grounds after your mother died. I saw her whisper to the elders, promising them influence, promising silence. The locket burned hotter in Amara's palm. The spirits circled her gently now, wrapping her in their grief, their pain, their need for justice. You must return, her mother said. Return to the world and speak what they have buried. The dead can guide, but only the living can act. Amara felt her knees weaken. The weight was so heavy. I'm just a girl, she said. No, her mother whispered. You are our voice. The lantern flared again, its violet flame turning into a soft gold fire. It no longer needed oil. It burned now with ancestral light. You carry us, said the midwife. In every step. You speak for those who cannot, said the herbalist. And through you the balance will return. Amara closed her eyes, the tears flowing freely. When she opened them, the spirits were fading. But her mother lingered a moment longer. I love you, Amara. And now, finally, I can rest. The last thing Amara felt was the touch of a ghost's kiss on her forehead. Then she was back. The crypt's cold stones returned around her, but they felt different now, less like prison, more like passage. The locket no longer weighed her down. It anchored her. She stood tall, the lantern in her hand casting a soft golden light. It illuminated the walls not with fire but with truth. Symbols carved long ago began to glow, runes of justice, balance, and protection. The crypt doors, sealed for decades, groaned open with a gust of warm air, and Amara stepped out into the world. Dawn was breaking. The sky blushed with the first signs of morning, and in the village square, a few early risers gasped as they saw her, a girl presumed dead, walking calmly from the tomb. She said nothing at first. She walked to the center of the village, climbed onto the speaking stone where elders once announced decisions, and raised her lantern. Villagers gathered, murmuring, confused. And then she spoke. My mother did not die by fate. She was poisoned by the one who calls herself Mama Idina. Gasp. A few turned to run. Others stood frozen. Amara continued, her voice steady. I have seen what lies behind silence. I have walked with the dead. They have shown me their pain. And they will not rest until the truth lives. Elders approached, faces pale. Some shouted. But the lantern flared and they fell quiet. Even Mama Idina appeared, her robes wrapped tight, eyes wide with dread. Amara faced her. You locked me with the dead to hide your crimes. But the dead speak now. And they have named you. Mama Idina tried to speak, but her throat caught. Her legs gave way and she collapsed to her knees, not in repentance but fear. The villagers looked to one another. What had once been whispered could no longer be denied. Amara stood like a storm breaker, young, trembling but radiant with fire not born of this world. She did not seek revenge. She spoke truth. And that truth burned brighter than any torch. At the first light of dawn, the village was still. The land lay wrapped in a blanket of cool mist, and the soft chirps of birds echoed in the distance. But the silence was broken by a creaking sound, a sound that seemed to emanate from deep within the earth, as though the very tomb itself had come alive. The massive doors of the ancient crypt groaned open. A shadow moved from within, casting a long silhouette over the sacred ground. The villagers who had gathered at the edge of the square stiffened in awe and fear. It was Amara. She emerged from the tomb, walking slowly but with a steady grace, as though the weight of death had not touched her. Her dark eyes shimmered with something new, something fierce yet calm. In her hand she held the locket. Its delicate gold was now glowing faintly, the faintest glow of something ancient and powerful. The first rays of the sun caressed the earth, making the locket gleam like a beacon. Amara's skin caught the sunlight, her face illuminated with an ethereal glow as she stepped into the world she had once thought lost to her. The villagers stood frozen, their collective breath held in unison. They had all known the stories, the whispered warnings about the family crypt and the curse that surrounded it. No one had ever come out of the tomb. No one until now. Amara was different. She had returned not only from the crypt, but from the very mouth of the past, carrying with her the weight of secrets long buried. As her foot touched the ground outside the crypt, the village seemed to hold its breath. Every eye was fixed on her, filled with a mixture of disbelief and awe. Amara, the girl who had been locked away by her stepmother, now walked among them as if nothing had ever happened, nothing had ever been lost. She stopped at the center of the square, where the villagers had gathered, her presence commanding their attention. It was then that the matriarch of the village, Mama Idina, appeared. Her face had been pale, but it grew even more ghostly as she saw the girl standing before her, bathed in the light of the rising sun. The curse she had tried to create, by locking Amara in the tomb, had failed. And now, the girl who had been buried with lies and deceit stood before her, holding the power to reveal the truth. Mama Idina's hand trembled as she placed it against the wall of the nearest hut. Her eyes widened with horror, but she could not move. For a moment the entire world seemed to freeze around them. The villagers sensed it too, that shift in the air. They could almost taste the impending storm. Amara turned her head slowly to meet the eyes of the woman who had done this to her. She felt no anger, no hatred, only a quiet knowing. "You locked me in the tomb, Mama Idina," Amara said softly, her voice carrying through the silence. "You believed I would break. You believed the truth would stay buried forever. But the truth always finds a way." Mama Idina's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her lips were trembling, but she could not speak. The terror in her eyes was more telling than any words could be. Amara knew this fear. She had seen it in the villagers, the way they would whisper and avoid her gaze. Now it was Mama Idina's turn to feel it. "You may have poisoned my mother," Amara continued, her voice rising with each word, "but you could not poison my truth. And now the dead speak through me. They have named you." The villagers gasped, but none dared to approach. They had heard the whispers of the girl's strange powers, how she had walked among the spirits, how the lantern she carried had burned with the light of truth. But none had expected this moment where the dead and the living would collide in such a way. Amara's gaze never wavered as she looked at the woman who had once been her stepmother. She felt no need for words of vengeance. She had come to deliver something greater than that. "I've walked with the dead," Amara said, holding the locket up high for all to see. "They have shared their pain with me. And now I carry their truth. This is the truth you tried to bury." Mama Idina's knees buckled and she sank to the ground. The villagers stood frozen, too stunned to intervene. The locket glowed with an unearthly fire, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out from the past. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, the shadows of the crypt, of the lies, began to fade. Amara stepped forward, her feet steady and sure, as though she were walking not only on the earth but through time itself. She could feel the presence of the spirits with her, their voices reverberating in the air. The power of their truth was now in her hands, in her heart. And she would make sure that it would never be silenced again. The villagers who had once turned their eyes away from her, now stood in awe. There was no more hiding from the truth. No more pretending that the past could be erased. It had returned and it had come to claim its due. Amara stopped just before Mama Idina. Her mother's spirit had spoken to her of justice, but it had also spoken of mercy. This moment was not to be one of cruelty. It was a reckoning, a turning point in time when the darkness of lies was brought into the light. "You will be judged, Mama Idina," Amara said. "But not by me. The ancestors will speak through the people you've wronged. They will be your judge." The sun shone brightly now, casting its light on Amara as she turned away from the crumpled figure of her stepmother. Her mission had been fulfilled. The dead had been given their voice, and now she had returned to give them the justice they had long been denied. As Amara walked away from the square, the villagers parted for her, their faces filled with a mixture of awe and fear. The girl who had once been locked away with the dead had returned, holding their secrets, their pain, and their truth. The echoes of their voices would forever be carried by Amara, and the truth she now held in her heart would never again be silenced. Amara stood at the center of the village square, the sun now high in the sky. She had called for a gathering, a trial of sorts, but one unlike any the villagers had ever witnessed before. The air buzzed with a mixture of fear and anticipation, as word of her return from the crypt had spread like wildfire. The villagers whispered to each other, unsure of what to expect, but all were certain that something monumental was about to unfold. Amara had walked into the square with purpose, her head held high. In her hands she carried the locket, the key to everything. Her eyes glimmered with the strength of someone who had witnessed the raw power of the dead, and in that power she had found her own. She had no fear left. This was not a moment of vengeance, it was a reckoning, a moment where justice would be served. The truth would no longer be buried. As the villagers assembled, Amara spoke, her voice calm but filled with a weight that carried across the entire square. "I have returned," she began, "not just to tell my story, but to give a voice to those who have been silenced. The dead have spoken through me, and now their truths will be heard by all of you." The villagers fell silent. Some looked uneasy, others confused, but no one dared interrupt her. Amara was not the quiet, shy girl they had known. She was different now, something stronger, something more. One by one, Amara began to name the villagers. She started with Mama Idina, her stepmother, the woman who had locked her in the crypt, the woman who had poisoned her mother out of jealousy. "You all know her," Amara said, her eyes steady as she looked out across the square. "Mama Idina, who plays the role of the loving wife and mother. But behind that mask she is a woman driven by hatred and envy. She hated my mother because of the love my father had for her, and she wanted that love for herself. So she poisoned her." The villagers gasped, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Some were already looking at Mama Idina, whose face had drained of all color. Her hands were trembling and she could not meet anyone's gaze. Amara's words had struck her with the force of a thunderbolt. Amara continued, her voice unwavering. "You see, it was not a natural death that took my mother from me, it was Mama Idina's envy, her cruelty, her desire to wear a crown that was never meant for her. And in doing so, she took the life of the woman who loved me, the woman who gave me life." Mama Idina stood motionless, her lips parted as though to speak, but nothing came out. She had no defense, no words to explain her actions. She was silent, her eyes wide with fear, as though the truth had shackled her in its grip. But Amara was not finished. She motioned to the hidden chamber behind her. "These are not just words," she said. "I bring evidence, proof of the crimes committed." At her command, several villagers stepped forward, each carrying an item from the hidden chamber. A faded letter, a gold bracelet, a delicate necklace, and a broken piece of a carved wooden box. Each item was taken from the tomb, from the spirits that had guided Amara, each one holding a story of betrayal, deception, and greed. The first item was a letter, one that had been hidden away for years. It was from Amara's mother to her father, written shortly before her death. It revealed the truth about Mama Idina's plotting, the slow poison she had used, and the manipulation she had exerted over her father. The letter spoke of Amara's mother's fears, how she had sensed danger but had been powerless to stop it. The villagers read the letter in stunned silence. A few dared to look at Mama Idina, but she still said nothing. Her eyes were hollow, her gaze fixed on the ground. The next item was a gold bracelet, one that had belonged to Amara's mother. It had been a gift from her father, a symbol of their love. Amara explained that the bracelet had been stolen by Mama Idina shortly after her mother's death, a way for her to claim the life and love that had once belonged to another. Then came the necklace, one of exquisite craftsmanship, with delicate designs etched into the gold. It had once belonged to a woman who had been a close friend of Amara's mother, a woman who had died under mysterious circumstances shortly after the arrival of Mama Idina. The villagers knew the woman, but they had never questioned the cause of her death. Now they saw the truth. Mama Idina had been responsible, using her cunning to manipulate and deceive those around her, leaving a trail of destruction in her wake. The final item was a broken piece of a wooden box. The box had once held a family heirloom, an artifact passed down through generations. Amara had found the box in the hidden chamber, its broken pieces scattered among the remains of those who had been forgotten. The spirits had whispered its significance to her, telling her that it was Mama Idina's greed that had caused its destruction, just as she had destroyed everything in her path. With each item, Amara revealed the darkness that had plagued her family, the lies that had been woven into the fabric of their lives. The villagers were shaken, some in disbelief, others in sorrow. The truth had come and it was impossible to ignore. As the evidence piled up, Mama Idina's facade cracked. She crumbled to the ground, sobbing, her tears mixing with the dirt. The villagers looked at her with disgust, and some even took a step back as if they could no longer stand to be in her presence. But Amara did not look at her with hatred. Instead, she stood tall, her head held high, as though the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders. She had done what needed to be done, and now the villagers could no longer turn a blind eye to the truth. "The time for silence is over," Amara said, her voice steady but filled with an undeniable power. "The dead have spoken and I carry their truth. No longer will you ignore the cries of those who have been wronged. No longer will you let the guilty go unpunished." The villagers nodded, their eyes now filled with respect for the girl who had returned from the tomb, who had faced death and emerged victorious. They had seen her strength, her resolve, and they knew that she had not come for vengeance. She had come for justice. And as Amara stood there, surrounded by the evidence of her stepmother's crimes, the villagers knew that they could no longer live in the shadows of the past. The truth had been laid bare and it was time for them to face it. The trial of secrets was over, but the change it had wrought in the village would never be undone. The whispers of the dead had been heard, and the living would carry their voices forever. Years passed and the village, once shrouded in fear and silence, had been transformed. The people lived with the knowledge that their past wrongs could no longer remain hidden, that justice, no matter how long it took, would find its way to the surface. The spirits of the dead, once silenced by neglect and malice, now had their voices heard. And at the center of it all was Amara, a girl who had walked out of the tombs carrying the truth that no one else dared to speak. As time wore on, the village began to change. The land flourished, its fields rich with crops and its people bound together by the shared understanding that the past could not be buried forever. They had learned to speak of their pain, their guilt, and their secrets, and in doing so had found peace. Yet, amidst the newfound harmony, there remained one role that no one had expected. Amara, the girl who had walked with the dead, had become the guardian of their resting place. Her transformation was slow but inevitable. As the years passed, Amara grew into a young woman, her presence calm and unwavering. She took on the mantle of the village's new gravekeeper, tending to the tombs with a reverence and respect that few could match. But it wasn't just the care of the graves that set her apart from others who had held the position before her. It was something deeper, something the villagers could feel, even if they couldn't fully explain it. Amara didn't just tend to bones and soil. She listened to them. The whispers of the dead were always with her. They spoke in voices that only she could hear, murmurs carried on the wind that rattled the leaves of the trees and rustled the grass around the tombs. The spirits no longer cried in vain, they had found their voice in Amara, and she had become their conduit. When she walked among the graves, the spirits would greet her, sharing their truths and their burdens. Amara, in turn, would offer them solace, quietly promising that their secrets would not be forgotten. She would kneel beside the weathered stones and place her hand on the cold granite, listening for the voices that spoke only to her. And so, over time, the villagers began to regard Amara with a mixture of awe and reverence. They knew that the gravekeeper was no longer simply the caretaker of the dead. She had become a keeper of their stories, a guardian of their truths. The shrine that had been erected outside the tombs became a focal point for the villagers, a place where those who sought answers or redemption could come to leave their messages. The shrine was simple yet elegant, with a stone pedestal at its center, where people could leave offerings or written notes. The stones around it were inscribed with symbols, marking it as a sacred place where the living and the dead could communicate. Those who sought the truth would leave their questions at the shrine, hoping, sometimes desperately, that Amara would hear them and answer. The messages varied. Some came seeking answers to long-lost family histories, others begged for forgiveness for wrongs they had committed in the past. There were those who hoped to make peace with the spirits of loved ones long past, and others who simply wished for guidance. Amara, it seemed, could hear them all. Whether they were seeking closure, redemption, or simply someone to listen, the girl who had once been locked away with the dead now held the key to their stories. Every night, as the moon rose high over the village, Amara would sit beside the shrine. The wind would carry whispers to her, and the lanterns would flicker as if stirred by an unseen force. Sometimes she would speak softly to the spirits, offering her own words of comfort. Other times she would simply listen. The villagers, while still cautious in their respect for the dead, began to understand that Amara was no ordinary gravekeeper. She had become something more, a link between the world of the living and the world of the dead, a guardian of the memories and stories that had been silenced for so long. In her presence, they began to feel the weight of their own truths, the buried regrets and unspoken sorrows that they had carried with them for years. Those who had been silent in life found their voices through Amara. And for those who came seeking answers, she was there, ready to listen, to help them find their way. The shrine outside the tombs grew with each passing year, becoming a place not just for the dead, but for the living. And as Amara's legend spread, her role as the guardian of the dead became more than just a position. It became a calling. It was a legacy built on the whispers of the past and the courage of a girl who had faced the darkness and walked out holding the truth. Amara never turned anyone away. She knew that the dead had their stories and the living had their burdens. Both needed a listener, and she had been chosen to be that bridge. The villagers would sometimes speak in hushed tones about the girl who walked with the dead. They would tell stories of the girl who had once been locked away in the crypt, only to return with the secrets of the dead in her hands. And they would say that she was still there, among the tombs, listening to the whispers of those who had passed. The villagers had learned something important from Amara. The truth, no matter how long it took, would always find its way into the light. And sometimes, the dead had more to teach the living than anyone could ever expect.